Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started in just a few minutes. While we're waiting for our attendees to enter, if you want to tell us where you're coming from in the chat, we'd love to say hello to you. I'm coming to you today from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Someone from Manitowoc. Madison, Milton, West Bend, Decorah, Iowa. Welcome from out of state. New Jersey, Fox Point, Eau Claire, Green Bay. This is wonderful. Onalaska, Utica, New York, Cleveland, Wisconsin, Cambridge, Wisconsin, Bismarck, North Dakota. Wow, it's great to see people from all over. Sunny McFarland. Great. Just gonna give it one more minute for attendees to arrive and then we'll start. Wausau, Chicago, Buffalo, New York. Wonderful. Well, I think we can get started. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kristen Leffelman, and I'm the Southeast Outreach Coordinator for the Wisconsin Historical Society. We're very excited to have you with us today for this wonderful opportunity to hear from our esteemed panelists about the Hmong diaspora and refugee experience in Wisconsin and the greater Midwest. And Luke, if you have the PowerPoint, if you could start that. Perfect, and next slide. So we have just a few notes before we begin. During the presentation, the chat function will be turned off, so our panelists have our full attention. Please use the Q&A function to direct questions to our panelists. During the Q&A period at the end of the presentation, all other comments can be sent with the chat function. Our team members will be monitoring both the chat and Q&A throughout the program, and we'll get to as many questions as we can while respecting our presenters' time, though we may aggregate some questions if necessary. We look forward to a respectful and engaging conversation today. So with that, I'd like to introduce the Ruth and Hartley Barker Director and CEO of the Wisconsin Historical Society, Christian Overland, who will be introducing our panelists today.
Thank you, Kristen, and welcome to all to this webinar. I'm grateful for Kristen's work along with Janet Seymour, Liz Arbuckle, the programs and outreach team, along with Kate Thompson and the entire Wisconsin Historical Society press team too. And the IT team, of course, that made all of this event possible today. So, our team at the Wisconsin Historical Society connects people to the past by collecting, preserving, and sharing stories. We truly believe that increasing the public's knowledge of history through our collections, media, programs, and of course the Society's press has profound societal, cultural, and economic benefit, especially during turbulent times like we're living today. But creating access through history is not enough. We're committed to working with our communities, holding conversations such as today's about how history has changed and shaped our world, as well as the need to change systems that have been biased against and caused the oppression of people of color. Our panelists today will discuss and explore the Hmong diaspora to Wisconsin and the important contribution of Hmong Wisconsinites today. This session is part of a series that's produced by the Wisconsin Historical Society that's throughout the nation, and we hope you'll enjoy it and come back and engage us again. To start today's panel, though, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Dr. Chia Youyee Vang, and I'm proud to say is a member of the Wisconsin Historical Society's Board of Curators. Dr. Vang is the Interim Chief Diversity and Equity and Inclusion Officer, as well as Professor of History at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and is a wonderful contributor to research and academic scholarship there. Dr. Vang's research is global in scope, but intimately informed by her own refugee experiences as a child. She's interested in not only understanding the larger political and military transformations, but also the lived experiences of those who experienced wars not of their own making, but were fought in their home environments. Our second panelist, Pao Lor, is a professor and chair of the professional program in education at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. Prior to joining UW Green Bay, Pao was a school administrator, middle and high school teacher, university academic advisor, and varsity soccer head coach. He is author of the new Wisconsin Historical Studies press book, Modern Jungles, Hmong Refugees, Childhood Story Survival. Our third panelist for today is Maya Zong Vu, who is board president of the Hmong Institute and author of the Wisconsin Historical Society book, Hmong in Wisconsin. Mai Zhong has been a cultural trainer, folklore performer since 1997, in performing Hmong poetry, song, and stories. She also has been a tireless advocate for the poor for the past 35 years, especially for the Hmong people and refugees. Her advocacy and her grassroots activism have led to the development of Hmong and refugee women nonprofit agencies in Wisconsin, Georgia, as well as to numerous programs dedicated to Hmong cultural enrichment. Please join me in welcoming our panelists, starting with Dr. Chia Youyee Vang.
Thank you so much, Christian. It is my deep pleasure to be a part of this panel today, speaking about a topic that I care very much about, that I live and breathe every day, because it is the larger history that we'll talk about. They're also part of my own personal history. So thank you so much. And I just feel so blessed to be a part of this panel with my two distinguished, colleagues who we share similar experiences. We travel the same path, but our experiences are pretty diverse as well. So I look forward to speaking with them and hearing about their perspectives, and then also to engage with all of you who have decided to join us today. So I want to first begin by saying that I'll provide a more broader historical overview, and then we'll hear a lot of the personal experiences from our two authors who have a deep Wisconsin history. I want to point out that I am actually, my family actually resettled next door. So I grew up in Minnesota. My family came in 1980 when I was about 9. So I did not grow up in Wisconsin, but I joined the history faculty in 2006. So I have been here for almost 15 years. So when people say, where's home? Home is now in Wisconsin. So I'm very happy to call myself a Wisconsinite, although I travel all the time to Minnesota because my family lives there. So again, I want to say that I'll talk a little bit more about history generally, and then end my remarks this afternoon on Wisconsin. When the Hmong people first arrived in the mid-1970s, in 1975 in particular, I think very few people could have imagined that our community would grow to be more than 300,000 in the United States today, and that the state of Wisconsin, right, in the upper Midwest, that we would become the third largest home to the Hmong American population. In 1975, I think very few people could have imagined something like that. Interestingly, I think then as now, people continue to pose the question, why did Hmong people choose to come to Wisconsin? I get that question a lot, even today in 2021. I want to begin by saying that let's be clear about this. Hmong refugees initially did not choose to come to Wisconsin. I'm sorry to say that, we did not choose. Individuals and groups here in Wisconsin, churches, communities, they're the ones who opened their homes and churches to sponsor us. So as more and more refugees settled in other parts of the country, we did exactly what other immigrants who came before us did. We practiced chain migration, and we moved to areas that have support, cultural, educational, and also community support. So that's what we did for our communities. That's why Wisconsin is, has the Hmong population it has today. So people often ask the question of why did Hmong people seek refuge in the United States? And I, as a historian, sometimes I'd like to say we are very unique, But in a broader historical context, the Hmong from Laos who became political refugees and who resettled in the United States, we were among the many, many groups across the globe who became what I call entangled in these larger 20th century political and military struggles. We were involved in a war that was decided and paid for by great powers from the other side of the world. But as Christian said in my intro about how I do my research, but the wars were fought in our villages and towns. The division of our people, Hmong in particular, who reside in the northern mountainous regions of Laos and Vietnam, that began in the French colonial era, and that would continue to expand during World War II as more and more people became, involved in the different political spectrums during the 20th century. So during World War II, it was not possible for people to stay neutral, especially as after World War II, when you began to have decolonization processes intensify in the post-World War II era. And as you all remember, the increasing Cold War tensions in the 1950s led to what we in the United States call the Vietnam War, but everyone in Asia call it the American War. So it was within this political context that what is popularly known or referred to as the US Secret War in Laos occurred. This covert operation, one of the largest in the CIA's history, occurred on Lao territory from 1960 to 1975, very much in direct support of the larger war efforts in Vietnam. During the Secret War, more than 40,000 Hmong men and boys served as America's foot soldiers in Laos, trained by Americans and paid for, armed with American military equipment. These soldiers paid a very heavy price for defending American interests in the region, and of course, protecting, our families as well. More than half of the soldiers were killed in action or injured for life because the soldiers were very much fighting near where families were living. Civilian casualty ran rampant. It's hard for people to imagine that, but when a bomb is dropped, it does not discriminate. It doesn't distinguish between combatants and civilians. So many people, families, women, children, elderly died as a result of the war. In the end, the war ended in 1975 for the United States as the Paris Peace Agreement enabled the United States to disengage from Southeast Asia. But for the people in Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia, it did not end until 1975. Soon after the April 30, 1975 fall of Saigon, as most people are much more familiar with, American personnel and South Vietnamese who worked for Americans were evacuated. The CIA actually orchestrated a small evacuation of Hmong military leaders and their families as well. And most people, right, about an estimated 2,500 to 3,000 people were evacuated. But when no more planes came, people like my family decided to go back to our village and try to make sense of our lives, to live and see if there was other opportunities to leave the country. So we didn't leave in 1975. We stayed until 1979. So the very small number of Hmong who were air evacuated were the fortunate ones. The rest of the more than 150,000 of us who fled trekked through the jungles, as Pao's book really makes clear. We trekked through the jungles on foot. Many of us paid these guides lots of money to get us across the Mekong River, where everybody had to cross, which divides Laos from Thailand. We all crossed the river. Thousands died along the way, either from hunger or from disease or from other kinds of, or drowning in while they're crossing the river. These are the diverse stories, experiences that those of us who went through that journey experienced. From 1975 to the mid-1990s, the refugees spent some varied length of time in the camps. These were United Nations sponsored camps located along the eastern part of Thailand. I want to just make a couple of thoughts about how when Hmong refugees first fled, right? I think many people thought it was temporary, that when things improved, that they would return home. But not long after the first group left Laos, they realized that return to their villages was not an option, as more and more people fled across the river to these camps, struggling, talking about the struggles in, after 1975, after the leaders left, the struggles, the atrocities that they experienced. in making more and more people flee. So it was really in the camps that Hmong people, the refugees, waited for sponsors in the United States and in other parts of the world who would, offer us refuge. When the refugees received news of sponsors in the United States in particular, then the families were prepared for their journey to start a new life in, a place that they can't even begin to imagine what it would be like. So where Hmong people initially ended up, where we resettled, had very little to do with decision-making we had, right? Rather, it reflected the willingness of people in all of the different local places around the country who, again, as I said earlier, opened their homes and churches for us. The federal government is responsible for processing refugees, but it is really the state and local and community organizations that provide resources and support to the refugees. So from 1975 to the mid-2000s, more than 1.4 million refugees from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia had resettled in the United States. And Hmong represent about 10% of that population. So today, the number of American-born Hmong had exceeded the foreign-born. We are present in all 50 states, but California, Minnesota, and Wisconsin continue to have the largest Hmong populations in that order. In Wisconsin, very interestingly, as I said, I grew up in Minnesota, where Hmong heavily concentrated in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. Here in Wisconsin, we are present across the state. While on the East and West Coast, we are a very small percentage of the larger Asian American communities. In Wisconsin, we are the largest Asian group. Many families continue to struggle, but many Hmong have also done very well for themselves. We may have arrived with not much more than the clothes on our backs, but today we are contributing members of society. Our community is very diverse now. We still have elders who don't speak any English, but we also have many American-born children who don't speak any Hmong. Some of our community members have become elected officials, and hundreds of our young people are attending, colleges and universities throughout the state. And just a point of important fact, across the 13 UW Wisconsin system, across the 13 campuses, 7 of them each have at least one tenured or tenure-track faculty members of Hmong, ethnicity. And us, 3 of us have become full professors, including, one of these speakers who's here today. And so I want to just end by saying that I think if we compare the Hmong community to other Asian American groups, then perhaps we are one of the most impoverished group as a group. But if we compare ourselves, right? If we compare us to 46 years ago, where we began and where we are now, I want to just end by saying that I am content, right? Because the sacrifices that our elders made with their lives on behalf of US interests, even before we set foot in the United States, it has not been done in vain. And so we have not only survived, but our community has thrived, in particular in a state like Wisconsin that has provided so much support. And despite lots of negative things, it is precisely the environment here that has really enabled many of us to thrive. So with that, I'm going to, in fact, I forgot to discuss who would go first. So I know that Dr. Lor and Zong, whichever of you would like to go first, that would be just fine. Raise your hand. I love to just have one of you continue the conversation and share with us your own personal journey to this great state of Wisconsin.
In the script, I think I am last. I'm not sure how the slide.
Okay.
Zong, you can go next.
Okay.
I will be the last.
Okay.
Okay.
No problem.
So you're good. Thank
All
you.
right. Okay. All right, then I will start then. So first of all, yes, thank you to all of you for joining us today, and thank you for Kristen and all the leaders at the Historical Society for putting this event together. This is one of the events that I think we were hoping to do it last year as well, to celebrate the diaspora of the Hmong 45-year anniversary, but because of COVID, all those are home. And so I'm really happy to be part of this panel with, like Dr. Chia said, my two distinguished colleagues who are working along on the topic of community. And so it's my honor to be here. So a little bit about myself. Most of you who don't know, I am a former refugee, meaning, I was born during the Secret War and became a refugee in Thailand, where I grew up mostly. And I arrived to Wisconsin as a teenager and pursue my life as, a young Hmong who wanted, more than just getting married at a young age and so forth. So right now, I have 3 bundle of teenagers who have grown up to be American-born kids that has challenged me every day in terms of what I do, the preservation of culture, language, promotion, building capacity for the community, and so forth. And I have the privilege and the curse, to do what I do. And that's a great honor to be able to do what I do for the community, whether it's the Hmong community or the mainstream community. At work, I work for the Department of Health Services in Wisconsin, but I am here today on my Hmong Institute time as the board president of the Hmong Institute. Next slide. So Dr. Chia have talked about the history already, and I just want to say, the Geneva Accord really forever changed many, many of our lives. When I went to Switzerland to look at the historical piece, the deaths with the Geneva Accord brought a lot of tears to me, even though I did not know my own history until much, much later. Growing up as a kid in the refugee camp, I did not realize we were refugee until much, much later that, like a piece of puzzle, it came one at a time. And I remember broken down in tears when I became a board member with Hmong National Development, and we had a banquet, and Lionel Rosenblatt, who's one of the very active former soldiers, share our own history with us. So this piece of history is very important to all of us, and unfortunately, not many of our children knew about it. Next slide. And Dr. Chia mentioned a little bit on the issue of resettlement, and I'll just share, personally, many people think that, when we became refugee in Thailand and the resettlement opportunities opened up for us, people would think that our parents would, jump up and down and be happy about it. But many parents did not want to come. There's a huge hesitation because people like my father did not want to come for many reasons. And one of that is starting all over in a new country where you have to learn a new language and make new friends, and all of that, leaving behind your status as the leader in your own community and all of that. And so many of our parents didn't want to come, but young teenagers, like my older brother at the time, were the one that got us to the United States, not our parents. Next slide. Next slide. Mm-hmm. So again, the hesitation, it's huge among other people. And a lot of time we don't think about it, but people like parents of ours, when they start all over, that means, they have to learn a new language. A lot of roles are reversed, and there's a lot of culture barriers. So if you read the book that I wrote about the Hmong in Wisconsin, I talked about a lot of these barriers in there as well. I think for the language piece, a lot of elders feel like, you know, coming here, learning a new language is like borrowing your mouth to learn a new language and trying to mimic another language, and that's hard. And there's a lot of culture barriers because we eat rice, not potato, right? We eat differently, we live differently, and that's a lot of the culture elements that a lot of elders, you know, have to do that all over again, and they don't want to do as well. Next slide. In Wisconsin, just to give you a brief look of where the Hmong people are in Wisconsin, we are mostly concentrated in Milwaukee and then Wausau and so forth. So just to give you a quick look about the Hmong in Wisconsin, this is old data, but this is something to give you an idea. Wisconsin is the third largest of Hmong in the United States, which, you know, the Twin Cities the second, and California still continues to be the largest. Next slide. So I wanted to go in and talk a little bit about the integration. I know Dr. Chia talked about some of the success of our Hmong community, and some of those success comes with a lot of education and advocacy. In the Hmong community, we continue to do what we can on our own resources to tell our neighbors about our stories. Our veterans are working tirelessly to educate the mainstream about the history, why the Hmong come to the United States. And that's a piece of history that is being slowed down as our veterans are dying off and passing away. That piece of history is not as active as it was, you know, in the past. And that is, you know, something that's going to impact our youth as they don't have that firsthand history lesson from our veterans. Relationship building and engagement between the community and the Hmong community continues to be, and we continue to, you know, talk about how do we integrate into the mainstream by doing advocacy as well. There's a lot of unmet needs as well. Let's go to the next slide. Integration, again, you know, Dr. Chia talked about this. Becoming Americans, the 1.5 generations have become the anchors of our community right now, where they are the buffers in the community. They're the culture brokers, they're the educator, and all of that on top of their specialty, whether they're a judge, a professor, or lawyers, or whatever the profession that they're in. Next slide. I'm rushing because I want to make sure we go through all the slides I prepare with a short time. Next slide. The other piece that we have to do, really face, is asking the question of, do we assimilate or do we acculturate? And those two definitions, you know, impacts our community greatly. And depending on who you talk to, some people may be assimilating, others may be acculturating, and that means, you know, do you change a little bit or do you give up everything that you have? Next slide. Preservation efforts is something that is continuing to happen on an individual basis, community level, or nonprofit, educator, and so forth. So this is something that has a great impact for the future of our children as well as the mainstream. Next slide. Again, with the assimilation and acculturation, a lot of it has to do with identity issue. Many of us, sometimes we give up what we are to become someone who we don't really know who we are, and that can contribute to being unhappy, and that impacts greatly on your mental health. And that is something that is happening, you know, on every level, depending on where you are and who you live with. Next slide. The other is family dynamics. A lot of time we settle here with, just extended family living peacefully and with everything, with the changes and the structure and the linear thinking versus the circular thinkers. We are changing our family. We now have blended families that are, more complex than when we first arrived as refugees. Next slide. Language, history, and culture continue to be an issue in terms of culture for our young one, because now they don't grow up with the setting that we grew up, where we have celebration going on every weekend and we can witness and learn from that. So this is a huge thing for our American-born children nowadays. It's really trying to teach them their heritage. And next one. So yeah, here just, we have a lot of nonprofit in Wisconsin that's trying to do the work. And so the Hmong Institute is just an example of one. Next slide. In our approach with the Hmong Institute, we do education, intervention, and preservation. Next slide. An example of what we do in direct service is having a bilingual holistic community center in Madison that addresses mental health, senior meal, food, and other activities for our community as well as others. Next slide. The one last thought I wanted to share with everyone is that the Hmong community is a very young community. According to the 2010 census, 47% of our children are under the age of 17. And that means, our future American taxpayers can only be as productive as what we feed for them in knowledge, in experience, and opportunities. And if we don't give those to them, they may not be able to pay forward for all Wisconsinites if they don't know who they are. So thank you for the time. And I will pass on to Dr. Pao.
Okay, thank you very much, Chia and Zong. So those are great, you could say great historical snapshots, as well as putting the Hmong American experience in a broader context. So let me share with you a little bit about my background first. We actually landed in Long Beach, California back in 1980 and lived there just for a few months. Once in a while, my younger brother and I often look back and have some introspection as well as retrospection about what life would be like. What life would be like if we had not moved out of Long Beach. And when we were thinking about that, at that time, one of the rappers of the time was Snoop Dogg, and we found out that Snoop Dogg is from Long Beach. And so we were thinking, wow, how impressive would that have been to kind of grew up and surrounded by people like Snoop Dogg. So we lived there for about 4 months and then relocated to Green Bay, Wisconsin. And then pretty much since then, you could say that of the three of us, I've been living in Northeast Wisconsin pretty much the last 40 years. So I'll share with you some of my observations and thoughts about what happened in Northeast Wisconsin over the last 40 years. So this is more of a local outlook, but I think in many ways the transformation that occurred in Northeast Wisconsin, in many ways, you could say that also reflects the broader Hmong American experience in the United States. So the first item that I'm going to cover is obviously the socio-economic status. Just to give you a few snapshots, back in, let's say, 1980, we were one of the first families to relocate to Northeast Wisconsin. So I have seen the changes over the last 4 decades. Back in 1980s, I would say that as you know, it's almost like everyone back then. I remember you could say close to probably 99% of Hmong American families relied on public assistance for their livelihood. You know, you have public housing, food stamps, financial welfare assistance, as well as Medicare. So in those early days and early years, that's what I remember about some of the Hmong's families in Wisconsin. And then over the last, particularly in the 90s, Hmong American families started buying homes and getting better jobs, and basically the life in Northeast Wisconsin almost transformed, you could say, overnight in a very short amount of time. And I remember probably around 1982 and 1983, when many of us learned that there's a Hmong family in Green Bay that owned their house, which was for many of us just amazing. It was not only amazing, but it was inspiring. That wow, you know, there's a Hmong family that owns a house, and so that was you could say an awakening for many of us that it's possible, that it's possible for us to own a house in the United States. So that concept was very new for many of us, as well as just things like transportation. You know, it was so rewarding and so inspiring for the Hmong community in Green Bay particularly, because those are many of the families that I knew. And you know, when you saw some family or a family being able to purchase a brand new car, that was just, I mean, everybody was just so excited for that family. And it was almost like a beacon for everybody else to follow. So the SES of many Hmong American families have, you could say, has greatly changed over the last 40 years. And another change that I saw was the clan system. You know, growing up, or in the past, probably in the first 20 years, Hmong communities, you could say, predominantly relied on the clan system to solve day-to-day decisions, to resolve intra-clan conflicts and challenges, and more than anything else, to guide and to provide like a sense of direction and leadership about the state of the Hmong communities in Wisconsin, and what we needed to do in order to move forward. And so, you know, as we look at the Hmong communities today, you could say that there's now less and less reliance on the clan system to resolve many of the challenges and issues that go on within the Hmong community. Another area that I saw was the Hmong communities assimilating and transitioning to become more a part of the community that they live in. In the past, I would say the majority of Hmong family gatherings, cultural gatherings, community gatherings were limited to, you know, ones that were mainly being organized by Hmong families or Hmong community organizations or Hmong individuals. So, you know, today when you go to here in Northeast Wisconsin, anyway, we have like Oktoberfest, where yes, we do go and drink quite a bit. When you go to these or farmers market, you see that Hmong Americans are now a part of many of these community events. I remember in the past, there would be like art shows, car shows, nonprofit organizations that went on. And so we in the past, we were not, we were, I think, purposely, as well as very reluctant to join or to become a part of these mainstream community events. Gender roles. if there's one thing that I think has changed a lot, it is the gender roles within the Hmong community. The Hmong culture itself, just from my observations and experiences, it is very gender defined. You can see this when you go to Hmong funerals, Hmong weddings, Hmong events. And so there has been a lot of changes within, let's say, the Hmong community when it comes to empowerment of Hmong women, or the progression of Hmong women in the last 40 years. The progress, to me, has been amazing and much needed. And so for me to have witnessed, to see the changes, to see Hmong women having more predominant roles in Hmong culture has been amazing. However, there are a few things that I noticed that there haven't been much changed. For example, in Chia and Mahjong, unless you have seen one, I have not seen, let's say, a female Hmong wedding negotiator at a wedding. I have not also seen, let's say, a female Hmong individuals playing a role, a significant role at Hmong funerals. And so there's still some roles that are still traditionally gender defined. And I'm hoping that perhaps in the future that will change. And I will leave you with this. And I would say that in my lifetime, if there's anything that I learned that America is probably the best ideal place for Hmong Americans. I can't speak, on behalf of Hmong Americans around the world, but I could say that for Hmong Americans, America is like the ideal place that we could be. As I've come to learn, Hmong Americans are idealistic. They're resilient, motivated, controversial, independent, conservative. We want to practice our own religion. So today, when you look at the Hmong demographics in the United States, you have Christians, animists, atheists, and then you have everything in between. Another thing that I also learned is that, Hmong Americans are gifted, talented, you can say very troubled as well, visionary, extremely ambitious. And in my opinion, we have finally found our match here in America. After 50 years, in the past, just based on my experience, Hmong people used to move together to find salvation and to find comfort and to find safety in those early years. 50 years later is like your siblings are everywhere. One's living on the East Coast, one's living in Oklahoma, one is living in Alaska, one is living in California. And so I think after 50 years, almost 50 years of living in the United States, Hmong Americans have finally begun to figure this thing out, that you can find your niche just as if you look back at Hmong history, such opportunity was not given to Hmong individuals, whether it was in China, in Laos, or in Thailand. So I can't imagine where, I hope that I do get to see the next phase of the Hmong American experience, just to see where we're going to be at in 10 or 20 years. We still have a long way to go. Would love to see someone running for, let's say, Congress. Would love to see someone running for, let's say, a governorship position. Would love to see someone of Hmong descendants, let's say, running a Fortune 500 company. So those are some of my insights about the Hmong American experience, as well as what I think could and perhaps will happen, in the next 20 or 30 years.
Thank you so much, Pao and Zong, for sharing your stories. I know that we could spend another 3 hours, talking about this. And I know that we've touched on just such broad, themes. And I think one of the things that I agree with both of you is that, we have overcome a lot as a group of people who were in a very distressed position. But we've taken on all the opportunities. I think the three of us are the 1.5 generation born abroad but grew up here, and we have our foot in both doors. So we have a very intimate tie to that refugee experience and the opportunities we didn't have when we were younger, and then all the opportunities we had in Minnesota or in Wisconsin. And so I know we're short on time, so I was just gonna ask each of you to reflect briefly on this question, and then I'd love to open it up for others who have, taken the time to be with us to, share your questions in the chat, or that would be really helpful. My question is, we've touched on some really important points because the three of us are Hmong and we really care about our history and culture and the changes. How important do you think it is for us to continue to share our Hmong, history, Hmong refugee migration experience to a wider audience? I mean, we know our history, but it's not common history. And so how important is it that you think that we should be, sharing it more broadly to other people? So maybe just a minute or so of your response. I know it's hard, but, because of time constraints, what are your thoughts?
I'll go first. I think it's very important because if the mainstream knows about our history, they can also help pass it on to our kids who are also growing up American born, kids who don't know anything about our history. So it's going to take everyone to make sure that our kids and every kid has the necessary knowledge about the community in order to be serving the community efficiently. So very important.
I think for me, just in a very broad sense, I think it's a necessity for humanity as people, just to be open-minded, to learn about other cultures, to leave your comfort zone, and so that's kind of where I see the Hmong, or learning about the Hmong history, learning about Hmong history, learning about the dynamics of Hmong, the Hmong American experience in the United States. So for me, in a very broad sense, it is just about, that is a necessity, about cultural and intra, you could say intra, cultural competency and proficiency. So in a broad sense, that's why you could say I focus my research on this, as well as give presentations when I could.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really biased because, I'm a historian. And so I think it's really important, but, just with the three of us, because we are Hmong, we focus a lot on Hmong history, but just so people know, that's not all we do, right? So I'm first a historian, I just happen to be Hmong, and so, but the fact that we are able to share, I think it's really important. So yeah, is there other questions that anybody has, posted? Please, our staff will help to share those questions for our panelists.
Yeah, I have one here. After the conflicts in the Laos region ended and the area became peaceful, was there ever a desire from your elders to return to their homeland? And is there any desire from your generation to return there? Or is the opportunity so much better in America? And they're also asking, have any of you visited Laos or your elders' home village?
Go ahead, Zong.
Okay. So for our elders, yes, they would wish that they would be able to return home. For many of us, I wanted to, and then back in '95, I went to visit, and I only realized that home is in Wisconsin. So I did not want to go back and live there, but I'll go as a guest and visit.
I often find myself in these debates, and not much of a debater or like to get in discussion with people. And at one time I was asked about this particular topic, and so what I shared with them was that let's look at it this way. If we were to ask Hmong Americans, would you like to go back and live in Laos? I think those who would want to go back, I think it would be a low percentage. Whereas if you were to ask our fellow Hmong living in Laos or in Thailand, would you love to go to America? And we agree that the percentage of Hmong in Thailand and Laos wanting to come to America would be much higher than, let's say, Hmong Americans wanting to return to Laos. I've been to Phon Savan, which is near where my family's lived, but we were not able to, let's say, go to some of the places that they did actually live.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I agree too. I have been back to Laos 7 times because in 2009, I started to take American students to Southeast Asia. So I always make an effort to stop in Laos. And the question about elders, I think there's a nostalgia for the places in which our childhood, we all have that, I think, regardless of, who we are. But many elders, I think they do desire that life. But for our generation, I think I agree. Visiting is really great. Reconnecting with my aunts and uncles who tell me great stories about me that I don't remember. That's always nice. Now with Facebook, I'm friends with my cousins who are closer to my age. And so they're constantly in touch with me. They get to see what I'm doing and I get to see what they're doing. So, but I think visiting is fine, but I don't see myself moving back to Laos because I am an American citizen. I live and work here, but I do think it's very important for all of us to kind of remember the places that we came from. So definitely the connections.
Okay, next question. What are your thoughts on the Hmong community participating and promoting social injustice, about social injustice on the Asian American community?
You mean promoting social justice?
I think, yeah, let me rephrase the question a little bit. What are your thoughts on the Hmong community participating in the social justice movement around, injustices towards the Asian American community right now?
Sure. I mean, I've seen so much in our community has, there is this stereotype, and I keep hearing people reiterate this, that, oh, Asians are quiet, we don't respond. That is not really true. Asian Americans have been very active in social movements for a very, very long time. And so I think for Hmong Americans, especially in the Midwest, in our 2 states with big Hmong populations, our community has been very active in going to Black Lives Matter, protests, and then also all of the anti-Asian sentiments and acts that have taken place more overtly more recently. I think we are out there on the forefront as well. So it is no longer true that we're just quiet and we don't critique injustices. I think many are Americans who understand that protest is very important and protest is very American. And so I see a lot of young people in particular, really out there and contributing in the spaces that I'm a part of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just want to add to that. I think, part of the invisibility of Hmong social justice protests is that sometimes they don't get covered by the media. So then people don't see it and they don't hear it. But for example, the first Hmong protest in Wisconsin took place at the university when that whole controversial about the former General Vang Pao took place. And there was like huge demonstration from our Hmong parents, our veterans. And again, the fact that we don't get coverage doesn't mean that we're not active.
I think given that we're in historically oppressed ethnic group, fighting against social injustices, equity, inclusiveness is a part of our DNA. We were willing to fight for it in Laos. I think in it's just that historically we fought for it in China. It's just that historically we have not been given, other than those extreme measures, when you're being pushed to the corner where you have to fight back, and you did. I think in the United States the context is a little bit different now, where you can go in protests and then let your positions known, without fear of being retributed, or without the fear of being persecuted. And so I think this is something that's relatively new to the Hmong Americans. But as Chia and Zong shared, we're slowly, the kind of getting on board, just like anything else that we've been learning about, life here in the United States. But I think it's always been a part of our DNA, not just for us, but for any group that's being treated unfairly, unjustly. So for me, it has always been a part of. It's almost like it has always been a part of who I am, as well as the Hmong American experience.
And I can share a comment to that. I think a lot of our parents are doing social justice in a very different way. And sometimes we don't recognize it. And all of that has to do with the success of their children. So, Senator Meemaw and I grew up in Appleton. And in that, during the time, we always face racial discrimination, right? And in her own experience, she wants to get back to those people who keeps throwing eggs at their house. And her mom's wisdom is, don't do anything, study hard, work hard, and someday be the boss. And so this is an example of fighting antisocial in a very different way.
I am very, very aware that we are nearing the very end of the panel, and I know there's more questions that had come in, but I want to be respectful of people's time as well. I think we are scheduled to end at 1, so I'm just gonna, we have your questions. Feel free to reach out to the panelists if you have specific questions for us. And I think, Kristen, I apologize, but we might have to just give each of, maybe Zong and Pao, you both have books that have come out, so I invite people to read them, and then maybe each of you could just give like a 1 minute closing remarks, and then we'll have to end so that people can go to their 1 o'clock meeting.
Sure, I know this is time which is not enough to talk about this huge issue. So in closing, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to open up a spark in the Hmong community in terms of having a conversation about who we are and what our contributions and barriers continue to be in Wisconsin. This is, I hope, the journey to many of your curiosity that would lead you to doing your own research, read out what material is out there, or give us a call, or come to trainings that we do at the Hmong Institute about the Hmong culture and heritage. And, we're all in this together. And so I hope that, if you have any questions, just reach out and we'll help you as much as we can. So thank you.
Speaking of book, I happen to have mine here, very, very handy. But I'll share the cover with you. I believe it's, yes, I believe it's correct me if I'm wrong, Chia and Zong, but it's probably one of the first. I have seen others, but perhaps of a different nature. So this is really the first one of its kind, you could say. And so, who knows, someday might be worth something. So feel free to read it. I think the book will give you a deeper understanding of some of the issues that we covered today. And to just echo Chia about, being a Hmong person, I think the Hmong identity is very complex. So, keep that in mind when you read about Hmong Americans or anything like that, that, we're all individuals, and it's a very complex identity to dissect and to have a great understanding of it.
Thank you so much, Zong and Pao, and thank you to the WHC staff. In my hat as a board of curator, I praise you for having this program and, inviting me to be a part of it. It is a topic near and dear to my heart. And as Pao said, we are a very diverse community, and we have done very well for ourselves in many aspects because it's the people in Wisconsin who enabled us to thrive here. So thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. Please, stay in touch. And many of you, I see names I recognize. You all do so much to help our stories be alive. So the stories we tell will continue to be told because there are spaces in places like the WHC who make it possible. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Chia, can I make a pitch to another learning opportunity?
Sure.
So as part of the diaspora, our banquet would be October 2nd, coming at the convention center, and we will have a whole list of awards and learning opportunities about the Hmong in Wisconsin. So if you're interested, look out for more information on the banquet.
Great. And will we have the books for sale there?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you, Mai Zong. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much from the Wisconsin Historical Society as well for attending. If our speakers need to leave, they can certainly depart, but we so appreciated having you here sharing with us today. And I do want to mention that the Wisconsin Historical Society Press has made a rebate or a discount available, for Mai Zong and Pao's books, along with one we have for young readers called Maya's Long Journey. So you can get those through shop.wisconsinhistory.org. And with the code Hmong21, you can get 20% off of that. So if you're interested in learning more, please explore those books. And Dr. Vang has some wonderful titles as well to explore. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope you'll join us for a future discussion.